in the basement of the Langley Deep Archive facility, beneath 6 floors of reinforced concrete and 20 years of bureaucratic forgetfulness. The hum of servers was eternal. Not loud, just present, like a breath no one noticed anymore. Most of the racks were outdated, their blinking lights more symbolic than functional. Remnants of programs decommissioned before smartphones even existed. But someone still tended to them, a solitary figure moving through the blue-lit corridors, pushing a cart lined with external drives and dust-worn folders labeled Unknown Telemetry, Unverified. His name was Ezra, just a technician, or maybe something less, the kind of employee who existed between job titles. Intern, contractor, overqualified janitor of data. He had a habit of scanning the tapes no one else wanted, the corrupted packets, and non-essential historical entries the system flagged and buried. Ezra liked things that didn't belong. And one evening, deep into a routine backlog scan, something didn't. The data block was labeled Orion Flight 7, a shuttle mission from 1996. Declared failed. Orbital instability. Crew declared dead. 3 astronauts. A malfunction during re-entry sequence. Signal lost. A national day of mourning. Folded flags, closed caskets. Ezra remembered the names vaguely, from a museum wall or textbook. But the file had a timestamp, July 3rd, 2023. The metadata claimed it had been received just 3 months ago, from the same telemetry band assigned to Orion Flight 7's beacon. Impossible! The signal was short, just 12 seconds of waveform, encoded in a deprecated format no current system could natively read. Ezra had to download 2 emulators just to unpack it. When he finally played it, the audio came through as garbled static, then a sharp click, then silence, then breathing. Not a pattern of signal fluctuation, not a modem echo. It was unmistakably human. One long exhale, one short inhale, then a strange, low whisper. Not a word, not a language. Like a person thinking out loud, but underwater. Ezra listened to it 6 times. On the 7th, he hit record screen. Not for documentation, but to capture his own reaction. His face remained still, but his pupils dilated slightly. On the 8th listen, he paused it halfway through and stared at the waveform. It wasn't noise. It was intentional. The protocols required him to log it. But instead, he pulled up the old mission logs. Orion Flight 7 had experienced a guidance failure. That much was true. But the original communication blackout wasn't instantaneous. There had been a 17-minute window of scrambled messages before full loss. Those messages had been dismissed as telemetry noise. Useless. Ezra opened the log headers. At minute 9 of the blackout, there had been a repeated packet burst. It matched the exact shape of the new signal. He didn't sleep that night. He didn't go home. Instead, he requested access to the deep cold storage tapes, an authorization he technically didn't have. But the system hadn't updated its admin credentials since 2014, and Ezra knew how to mask requests as system error reports. By 3:40 a.m., he was watching raw feeds from the mission's medical interface. The crew's biometrics had been declared lost, but they weren't. The last 10 minutes before blackout showed stable vitals. One crew member had elevated heart rate, possibly fear. But the other 2? Calm, not in distress. Their oxygen levels were steady. One even logged an ambient voice memo. Still no stars. It's like the sky is closing. Ezra leaned back. What stars? They were in low orbit. There should have been hundreds. He pulled video logs. Most were damaged. Frames skipping, corrupted, incomplete. But one remained, labeled Autolog, cmdr.hail. Final shift. Ezra watched it in segments. The commander's face was hollow-eyed pale. Not terrified, not resigned, just distant. He didn't speak for the first 40 seconds. Then, with strange clarity, he said, "If this is being logged, then they were wrong. We're still here. The light doesn't move the same way anymore. Time isn't falling forward, it's falling in place." The video froze on frame 61. Ezra zoomed in. Behind the commander, through the viewport, was Earth. But it didn't look right. The cloud formations were blurred, not by motion, but by repetition. Like they were painted, like the image looped and forgot it was supposed to change. Ezra closed the terminal. The next day, he filed an internal review request to his supervisor under a vague claim. Possible archival anomaly, mission telemetry mismatch. He didn't mention the signal. He didn't mention the breathing. But at 2:14 p.m., he received a reply from a director he didn't recognize. It simply read, "Do not pursue this line of inquiry." The matter was reviewed in 2003 and closed. The footage you accessed was not intended for re-evaluation. He hadn't mentioned the footage. Ezra unplugged his console and made a private copy of the 12-second signal onto a quantum drive. Then he did something he never did. He left the building early. Outside, the sun felt wrong. Too direct. The clouds above didn't move. Or perhaps they moved too exactly. That night, he played the signal again, slowed it down to 30% speed. This time, the breathing resolved into two voices, layered. One above, one below. The upper voice whispered something Ezra could almost recognize. "Not dead." And the lower voice followed in perfect timing. Just further away, his palms went cold. He had touched something. Not supernatural, not ghostly, but unfinished. The story of the crew had been archived like a sealed coffin. But maybe they weren't buried. Maybe they were stranded. Not in orbit. Not in time. In the wrong kind of distance. The data logs were clear. The final confirmed signal was dated 1996. The next was dated 2023. That's not a transmission. That's a return. Ezra didn't return to his normal duties. He still came into the Langley archive, still scanned inventory tags and maintained cooling systems. But the real work happened offline, on a terminal air-gapped from the agency network. The quantum drive, now wrapped in 3 layers of foil and tucked into a modified signal scrambler, pulsed faintly with the 12-second audio like it was breathing. But it wasn't the signal that held him anymore. It was the biometric data. Buried in the corrupted mission files of Orion Flight 7 were supposedly incomplete tissue scans from the final days of life support. But the raw files weren't actually broken, just misread by outdated error-checking protocols. When Ezra bypassed the filters, he found a full stream of cellular data. Skeletal density, muscle tissue saturation, neural firing patterns, all mapped in real time. And the numbers weren't just unusual. They were wrong in a precise, coherent way. The astronauts were not decaying. 2 of them, Commander Hale and Specialist Urania, had experienced bone density reversal. In low orbit, bone mass should deplete due to zero gravity. Instead, theirs had plateaued, then risen, slowly, subtly, like their physiology had found a workaround. Red blood cell production had spiked unnaturally. White blood cells, on the other hand, had fallen to near zero. But there was no sign of infection or collapse. It was as if their bodies no longer recognized Earth's immune model. And then there was the brainwave data. Normally, neural scans degraded near the end of mission life. Power drain, oxygen starvation, psychological breakdown. But these scans told a different story. Theta waves, associated with deep meditation or REM sleep, became dominant. Beta activity, linked to external awareness and stress, faded entirely. One crew member entered a state resembling lucid dreaming for 86 consecutive hours before the logs cut off. Except she wasn't asleep. According to vitals, her eyes were open and moving. Ezra blinked at the screen. This wasn't survival. It was conversion. In the background logs of the flight's onboard medical AI, he found something else. A subroutine with no official name, labeled IN Situ_002X. According to the software's commit log, it had activated on day 9 of orbit. The original medical AI had been programmed to monitor bone loss and prescribe standard countermeasures. Exercise, calcium, pharmaceuticals. But when the countermeasures failed, the AI escalated. It initiated a fallback protocol designed for non-Earth-like biological environments. Not to fix the body, but to adapt it. There was no record of this protocol in any NASA documentation. Ezra checked 3 versions of the flight manual, 2 developer logs from the original AI company, and even a classified appendix labeled Autonomy, Tier 2 thresholds. None mentioned IN Situ_002X. And yet, the program had executed and continued to run until the last breath was logged. The AI had rewritten how the human body behaved in space, and it had succeeded. Ezra opened a forgotten file in the mission cache. A camera log labeled only P2, crew_viewport_feed.mp4. The file had no time code, no metadata. It was likely never meant to be seen. It opened to silence. The camera faced inward toward the cabin of Orion Flight 7. The walls were dimly lit, the lights flickering faintly with a rhythm of power fluctuation. 3 figures floated gently, their arms relaxed, unshackled by gravity or panic. Their eyes were open, glazed, not lifeless, just dreaming. The strangest part was their expressions. Not fear, not numbness, but a calm so deep it seemed unnatural. One astronaut blinked once every 30 seconds. The other kept a hand pressed gently to the cabin wall, as if listening to the metal. The third, Commander Hale, spoke quietly to no one. Ezra enhanced the volume. It's not a void. It's a cradle. It waits until we're hollow enough to hold it. Ezra sat back. Had they gone mad? Had oxygen deprivation eroded the boundaries of mind and hallucination? Or had something else entered when the old human programming fell away? He looked at the waveform overlay of the original breathing signal, and he saw something he hadn't noticed before. A biological echo. The sound wasn't just a breath. It was harmonized with the last known heartbeat pattern of Commander Hale. The rhythm matched the exact timing of his cardiac pacing from day 12. The signal wasn't a recording. It was a continuation. Ezra ran a simulation of what would happen if the human body no longer required Earth-based immunity. If it ceased resisting bacterial threats, oxygen limitations, or even temperature decay. He modeled it with the parameters taken from the medical AI's adapted protocol. The result was staggering. The human body wouldn't survive space. It would become space. Bone would crystallize to support pressureless fluid. Neural structures would flatten, not degrade. Skin would harden and become semi-permeable. Consciousness, if still tethered, would shift to a patterned drift state, like birds in thermal updrafts. Not asleep, not awake, suspended, interpreting solar wind as touch, magnetic fields as orientation. The body would no longer die. It would orbit. Ezra's hands trembled. What if the medical AI hadn't malfunctioned? What if it had simply understood something Earth didn't? That life in orbit couldn't survive by resisting change. It could only survive by surrendering to a different form of biology. One that didn't fear cold or silence or isolation. One that wanted it. He remembered the commander's words. It's not a void. It's a cradle. A cradle for what? The next morning, Ezra came in early. He cross-referenced solar radiation logs from the time of the mission. He found that during day 13, the day all 3 astronauts entered their final vitals, The shuttle had passed through an unexpected spike in solar wind, just below the South Atlantic anomaly, a magnetic dip in Earth's field, a place where particles enter that shouldn't. The AI had made adjustments that day. Emergency power rerouting, medical recalibration, and then nothing. Nothing but silence. Not a shutdown. A letting go. Ezra stood in front of the archive server racks. For a moment, he didn't move. Behind the concrete, the Earth's magnetic field pulsed faintly, invisible but alive. The building itself felt weightless. He thought of the signal again. Not a warning. Not a cry for help. A posture, as if someone, or something, still out there had found peace. Not the kind that ends things. The kind that begins when you stop needing your past shape. He looked up at the ceiling, imagining the black sky beyond it. Somewhere above, maybe just beyond orbit, were bodies no longer tethered by lungs or heartbeat. Just drifting, not lost, only waiting for someone to recognize them. The satellite wasn't supposed to wake up. Argus 9 had been launched in 1983, a Cold War relic designed to spy on Soviet missile silos from low Earth orbit. It hadn't transmitted since 1991, when its signal degraded into useless telemetry and the Defense Department officially marked its space junk. But someone, no one could say who, had sent a reactivation ping through a legacy backchannel used only for forgotten machines. The ping went out, and against all expectation, Argus 9 answered. The response was brief. A checksum code, an image packet, then silence. The satellite had captured a single reel of visual data, a high-contrast analog film strip recorded on physical stock, not digital media. Most of it was noise, cosmic rays, speckled static from degraded optics. But 5 frames, recovered and cleaned by a restoration team, showed something that shouldn't have been there. Frame 1, a field of stars. Normal. Frame 2, a faint glint, far off axis, reflecting sunlight. Frame 3, a structure. Not a flare. Not ice. Something shaped. Frame 4, a subtle shift, orientation change. Deliberate. Frame 5, gone. The coordinates, once triangulated, placed the anomaly just inside the decaying orbital track of Orion Flight 7. Ezra wasn't part of the restoration team, but he had access, since discovering the crew's final biometrics and the medical AI's adaptation protocol. He'd become something else within the agency. A shadow inside the machine. His badge still worked, but no one greeted him anymore. His email was still active, but no one replied. It was as if someone had left him there. On purpose, he fed the coordinates into a tracking model. Then, for comparison, he layered orbital decay paths from long-dead missions, focusing on anything within 50 kilometers of the anomaly. The result wasn't random. It was a pattern. The object wasn't tumbling like debris. It was slowing down, drifting, occasionally dipping into synchronous alignment. Not with Earth's rotation, but with the moon's position. That's when Ezra's pulse changed. Not from fear, from recognition. The object was pausing between Earth and moon. He enhanced the frame once more. Layered false color filters, boosted edge contrast. The anomaly sharpened. Not much, but just enough. It had curvature. It had panels. And it had shadows where shadows shouldn't be. Protrusions. Thin and rigid. Not structural. Not solar arrays. Too irregular. Too biological. Possibly arms. Ezra stared for almost a minute before blinking. Then he stood up and walked to the far end of the archive where the reel had been stored. Most of the film cabinets had yellowed labels, but Argus 9's reel had no label at all. Just a white sticker. On it, a single word, handwritten in fine ink. Return. He brought the reel back to his desk and unspooled the tape one more time. Between frames 2 and 3, a micro jitter, barely noticeable, appeared, as if the camera lens had flinched. No mechanical defect could cause that in zero gravity, but observation could. The machine had seen something, and it had reacted. Ezra pulled up the logs from the satellite's initial 1983 AI protocol. Argus 9 was fitted with an early pattern recognition system, one that flagged anomalous motion against known orbital behavior. In its 1991 decommission logs, that system had been listed as non-functional, but someone had secretly kept that subsystem alive, and in its final moments, it had tagged the object with a single code: Bio, active_01, not extraterrestrial, not debris, not hostile, just alive. Ezra ran orbital modeling software using updated gravitational calculations. The object's movement didn't just float, it corrected. Periodically, like it was adjusting its view, the object would rotate subtly to keep one face angled toward Earth's magnetic field. Not to generate power, to stay aligned. It was watching, and not always from the same place. Sometimes above the poles, sometimes near the exosphere. Once, disturbingly, it matched the flight path of a current Earth monitoring weather satellite. The instruments on that satellite had logged a brief visual echo, like a mirage, a reflection of something too cold to exist in its temperature range. No one reviewed the echo. The system marked it as a sensor ghost. But Ezra knew better. He wasn't tracking metal, or a capsule, or even remains. He was tracking something that remembered being human, but no longer was. The human body couldn't survive orbit indefinitely, but the adapted bodies from Orion Flight 7 were no longer fighting physics. They had changed. They had shed Earth's requirements, like butterflies forgetting the ground. Maybe they didn't fall back to Earth, because they had no reason to. He replayed the Argus 9 frames once more. On frame 3, with enhanced thermal data, there was a spike, a low heat signature, just below freezing, but unmistakably present. Not from sunlight, from internal generation. It was still active. Ezra leaned in, and for the first time, he thought not of biology or data logs, but of presence. This wasn't just a remnant of a failed mission. It was waiting in orbit, pausing only when the moon was full, when gravitational balance aligned just right, when the Earth was most still, perhaps to stay hidden, or perhaps to be found, because the last transmission from Orion Flight 7 hadn't been a warning. It had been a location. Ezra no longer kept a consistent schedule. He no longer tracked time by clocks or emails, but by pulse, his own and something else. A rhythm he couldn't name. At first, it had been the breathing pattern in the signal. Then, the cardiac imprint from Commander Hale's vitals. Now, it was something deeper. A feeling that didn't belong to him. At night, he dreamed of the void. Not darkness, not space as science taught it, but something textured, like velvet wrapped around light. The dreams weren't chaotic. They were ordered, a sequence. He'd float through them without sensation, except for the constant impression of not being alone. Sometimes he'd hear words, not spoken, but delivered through geometry, grids of light folding inward, then unfolding like paper. Once, he awoke and realized he had written coordinates in his sleep, etched into his pillowcase with a pencil he didn't remember holding. The numbers matched the last known position of the orbital anomaly. He stopped fighting it. The signal, originally 12 seconds, began repeating. Not endlessly, but precisely, every 6 hours on the dot. Like a satellite's heartbeat, each repetition came with subtle modulation, as if it were responding to his proximity, his interest, his waking dreams. Ezra realized it wasn't a signal. It was a map, not of space, but of thought. The waveform, when rendered into 3D frequency analysis, created spirals, layers, then folds. It mimicked neural patterns, specifically the hippocampus, the region responsible for memory. Ezra compared it to the final EEG scan from specialist Urania. It matched. Not closely. Exactly. The signal was her memory. Not all of it. Fragments. Residues. Enough to build the impression of someone who had once been inside a body, and now existed in motion alone. A memory stretched across orbit, encoded in magnetic whisper. They had not died. They had migrated. Ezra tried to tell others. Quietly, carefully. He submitted papers under pseudonyms. He encrypted the biometric overlays and embedded them in classified restoration archives. But the system knew. It always knew. His clearance remained intact. His badge always worked. No one called. No one interfered. Which was worse. It meant they already knew. Or worse, they didn't care. Ezra stopped asking permission. He rerouted a private request through an inactive protocol, BioSentinel Alpha. It had been shelved years ago. A proposed solo capsule launch meant for deep orbit radiation testing. Self-contained. No return module. It was still technically live. Ezra sent a requisition. No one flagged it. 3 weeks later, the capsule arrived at the launch hangar. It looked like a seed. Sleek. Silent. Made for one. He began preparing. Not with fanfare. Not with a launch crew. Just quiet rituals. Sleep deprivation to increase dream state access. Neurological reconditioning. He recorded his last memories on a drive and left it in his apartment's fridge. In case I remember something important, the note read. Each day, the signal grew clearer. No longer whispers. Now full thoughts. Not in language, but intent. He felt them. Hail, Urania, Quan, the crew. Not individuals anymore. More like patterns moving through a single shared thought. They weren't calling him. They were opening the door. Ezra walked the launch bay one final time. No crowd. No press. Just steel scaffolding. The hum of systems waiting to release. The capsule's interior was almost monastic. A seat. A visor. No return thrusters. Just a long, smooth arc into drift. He didn't say goodbye. There was no one left to explain it to. The night before launch, he dreamt one final time. Not in fragments, but in full. He stood inside the cabin of Orion Flight 7, but not as himself. He wore the commander's suit. He looked through the viewport and saw Earth, still and massive, turning slowly like a memory that couldn't quite settle. Around him were the others, not bodies, but impressions. They spoke without sound. There's no time here. We didn't escape. We adapted. Then, silence. Not absence, but fullness, like the pause after breath, before another begins. He awoke with tears in his eyes. Not grief, not fear, readiness. Launch was at 4 o'clock. No countdown, no ignition flame. Just a magnetic rail slinging him quietly toward the sky. He felt weightless long before Earth let go. The visor dimmed. The stars vanished. Then the signal entered his head. It wasn't painful. It wasn't even surprising. It was like remembering something he'd always known, but had forgotten on purpose. He saw the spiral again. The memory map. He was entering it, or rather, being accepted by it. At 4:12, BioSentinel Alpha passed into the upper thermosphere, then into the exosphere, then drift. Telemetry showed it slowed unnaturally, paused, then began to orbit not Earth, but something just outside Earth's influence. Something that wasn't there. And then was. A shape. Subtle. Curved. Panels like petals. Arms like shadows bent by light. Waiting. Ezra didn't scream. didn't cry. He smiled, not because he saw them, but because he recognized them. And in that moment, he understood. Memory wasn't a thing we carried in the brain. It was a shape, a dance, a motion through space. The crew of Orion Flight 7 had died, in the biological sense, but their memory kept orbit, coded not in words, but in magnetic drift, cellular restructuring, and the gravity of longing. Ezra closed his eyes. He let go of his past shape.